Hello and welcome to our last episode of March 2023. We're here with Today in Space. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot to talk about. We've got this episode, we're going to cover a lot of the stuff that happened this month and kind of just share some articles. You guys can do some more research afterwards. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the brief review of what we're talking about, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on the matter, and then we're going to whip through about 4 or 5 stories here. The first one, for sure, is post the Relativity Space launch. Now, as far as the day that I'm recording this, I haven't heard anything about the results of what specifically happened with the second stage. It's also possible I've been busy and I missed it, but the reality is still the same, that Relativity Space launched the first 3D printed rocket ever, 85% 3D printed. On the third try, it was able to launch the first stage. It was able to get through max Q, which is the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure. The place in when you're launching a rocket where the rocket experiences the most force. They have to pull back the throttle on the rocket to even get the rocket through it. And the 3D printed structure, the 3D printed engines, those worked great. And they was able to separate the second stage. And on the second stage, there was an anomaly. Something about the igniting of the vacuum Aeon engine didn't happen right. Enough thrust was not produced. And you could see the gimbaling attitude control system trying to adjust for it. But it was just spitting out little bits of flame. Definitely not enough thrust for what you need to get whatever it is you're going into orbit. But getting this far was a huge success for them. They're going to take this data from Terran 1 and they're going to apply it to Terran R, which is their fully reusable, or at least planned to be reusable platform that the company's really going to be about. So this is kind of like when SpaceX had the Falcon 1 and now they're on the Falcon 9 after many, many years of iteration. Relativity Space is on that journey, and the one advantage that Relativity Space has is the Stargate printer, 3D printer. And if you're talking about the iteration game, SpaceX is really good at that, but the sheer physics of what Relativity Space's Stargate printer can do for the iterative process, they may be able to do it faster than SpaceX did. But, if we're going to critique it, I think the definite critique here is that it's great that we had a 3D printed rocket try to launch to space. At the end of the day, you still need to be able to deliver payloads to orbit for customers to want to use you as a launch provider. So that's the journey that Relativity Space is now on. But also, aside from, I think there's one rocket that made it to space on the first try, and that actually was a rocket that was built on technology that had already succeeded. So, there is a long history of the first launch to space going terribly wrong. And that happened. SpaceX had a terrible first launch. NASA had a few terrible first launches. And the key is that you find a way to survive enough launches to get enough good data. And for a first launch, Relativity did a pretty damn good job. Not in space, but a lot farther than most. So looking forward to that progress from them and learning more about what actually happened and how they can come out of this. So exciting stuff. I shared more about my thoughts in the last episode if you want to go listen to that. But that's Relativity Space, and congrats to Jordan Noon, who we've had on the podcast, who is the CTO of Relativity Space and one of the co-founders with Tim Ellis, who I've yet to interview but would love to speak with. But those two human beings really hit the ground running in their 20s. They were in school, rocket program, had a big dream, went after it, and now they're in their 30s. Their next decade, Tim is trying to get Relativity Space going, and Jordan is building up Embedded Ventures, and they're both affecting the aerospace industry in the way they can. So pretty cool stuff. Those are some trailblazers for sure, and best of luck to both of them and the Relativity Space team. I'm looking forward to seeing more from them. In orbital news, we have to take a throwback to a launch that we covered at the beginning of this year, Hakuto-R from iSpace Incorporated. They are at mission milestone 7, which for them, they were launching a lunar lander to the moon. And on the 100th day in space, the Hakuto-R mission 1 lunar lander is now safely orbiting the moon following a successful lunar orbit insertion maneuver. Now, this is a big step for this very young space company out of Japan, and they've really done a great job of getting this far. This is where everything up to this point, getting into lunar orbit insertion, that was difficult. Now they enter a whole new phase where we're at the moon, and now they need to orbit a while, figure out their next maneuver down to the surface, and then land this thing on the surface of the moon. So it's going to get very exciting here, and we're very much looking forward to what happens next, and their lunar landing is scheduled to take place in late April. A very busy April in space. Not only is there going to be a lunar robotic landing, but we're going to hear from NASA on April 4th, which we'll be doing a live stream. We're going to cover the selection of astronauts for Artemis 2, and Starship has been delayed into what seems like April now for the orbital test. So a lot going on, including JPL's open house. If you guys ever want to go to Jet Propulsion Lab, they sell open house tickets. They go extremely fast. So they actually go on sale at the beginning of April here. So I would recommend going to Twitter and following JPL. They will be the ones sending out when those tickets go on sale. I'm going to try to make it out, but there's a lot going on. So so we'll see what happens. But very busy April coming up. A big congrats to iSpace. This is a huge step in their whole proposal of landing on the moon. And yeah, wish them well. It's definitely hard. Not a lot have done it. We wish them well. All right, folks, there's a lot of talk about aliens and UFOs, UAPs, whether it's the Chinese spy balloon, the Tic Tac UFO, or any of the other UFOs that are out there and in the zeitgeist right now. The big question is, are you preparing for the alien abduction? Are you, as the human being, ready to be abducted by an alien? Are you representing humanity well? Are you a good specimen? Well, if you are worried about making sure that you represent all of humanity well on your first alien abduction, Manscaped has everything you need to be the perfect human specimen. The Beard Hedger is great. I've been using that here. The Beard Hedger Pro Kit has everything that you need, and honestly, I can feel like my beard is fuller. I feel like my skin is reacting better to my beard hair because I'm able to manage it with the adjustable blade, which has 20 different heights, and I'm able to basically in the middle of the week make a quick audible and get myself tip-top shape for that alien inspection. They also have just released the Weed Whacker 2.0, which is your ear and nose hair trimmer. Look, we don't want the aliens thinking that we've got a bunch of different hair, going out of different places. You really gotta, put on your best foot forward here for this alien invasion that's coming, right? If they're gonna take a look, you want to be peak specimen. So Manscaped is offering our listeners 20% off and free shipping by using the code word SPACE. You can get all the tools that you need to manscape, keep it trim, keep it clean, not only for the Earthlings, but for any Martians, Alpha Centaurians, wherever in the universe they come to have a little human experience, a little time analyzing the apes here on Earth. Make sure that you're representing humanity well. Prepare for your next alien abduction by using everything that Manscaped has to offer. Let's do what we can, because look, if we gotta put on a show, let's make it happen. All right, folks. So 20% off, code word space, and get free shipping for anything in the store. Beard Hedger Pro, again, join me on the beard journey here if you're interested. And the Weed Whacker 2.0 for all those other places. Don't forget the Lawnmower 4.0. That thing is a durable blade and helps get the job done. So 20% off, free shipping with code word space at manscaped.com. And do us all a favor and look good for your next alien abduction. And now, back to the show. This story comes from an article that was shared with me by my friend Chris. It's from Space News. Sandra Irwin wrote this on March 20th, 2023. And the U.S. Space Force budget includes $60 million over 2 years for tactically responsive space. So the budget proposed was $30 million in fiscal year 2024 and $30 million in 2025. And it's interesting to talk about because I think the more that space is in the zeitgeist and we see SpaceX launches on the regular and Starlink gets more involved in our daily lives, the question comes up about the Space Force, because you will inevitably hear Space Force Command is basically running launch operations out of Florida. Granted, there's the Navy's involved. There's a lot involved in the operations at the Cape, but it's the Space Force operation that's handling a lot of this. And the budget for the Space Force that they submitted to Congress is for $60 million over 2 years for a program known as Tactically Responsive Space. So tactically responsive space is essentially an initiative to demonstrate, as they say here. I was going to riff there for a second, but I might as well just read the definition. The tactically responsive space is an initiative to demonstrate the capabilities of commercial launch vehicles to deploy small satellites on short notice. This type of service would be used during a conflict to replace a damaged satellite or augment existing constellations. And military officials said having access to responsive launch would give the U.S. additional resilience in case adversaries attempt to shoot down DoD or commercial satellites providing services to the military. Now, this is important because essentially they're giving out these contracts to launch on 24 hours notice to get ready for a launch. Firefly is one of the companies, Firefly Aerospace, that was given this contract, and they're specifically looking at smaller launch providers. This is also following kind of this new look at space from the military side of things, of protecting the U.S.'s ability to launch things into space. And they've changed from this old school style of having, a few monopolistic big companies that launch stuff for the military. Those contracts were basically there was only one or two organizations that could launch things into space for the military when we were in our post-shuttle drought for launches. But now they've changed it to try and invest in a lot of these smaller companies and to kind of spread out the risk of launching things into space over all these other launch providers. So it's a very interesting time as we see space become more of an involved domain. Obviously, we talked about it in episode 300. We've talked about Starlink in the fight in Ukraine and how those satellites, while satellites and telecommunications for top secret satellites have been around for a while, and our interview with Kevin Kelly, the CEO of Arcfield, that company focuses on these solutions for these types of contracts and satellites that are going up there for these projects. So for something like this, and for how much money is being injected into the Defense Department right now, this Victus Nox goal, or Latin for conquer the night, is another way that the U.S. is trying to keep up its resiliency in space, is by having the ability to replace anything that may get shot down. Now, I'm a little concerned that the assumption is that these things are going to get shot down soon because of their use in the battlefield. I obviously, as someone who wants us to travel space, do not want a Kessler syndrome or Kessler effect, where we start having our enemies or even ourselves start destroying satellites that cause a tsunami of orbital debris that essentially makes it impossible for us to leave the planet at all because of how dangerous it'll be with all that debris. You would get hit by something on your way out. We don't want that, but there is this balance of figuring out how to have all of us work together in space, and we're definitely in strange times. So, if you thought that the Space Force was still a joke or that you weren't paying attention to it, this article is a really good example that the Space Force is not only here to stay, but is playing a larger and larger role as the days continue here, and our world is more and more in conflict. So, very interesting times. 60 million for the Space Force for tactically responsive space. We'll see where this goes. All right, we are at our final story for this month. Thank you for joining us. If you've stayed this long, I wanted to share this very interesting article that I saw scroll across on LinkedIn. It's from livescience.com, and it's a really great example of everything that we're about here on the podcast. For us and for space, I mean, if you don't know about my background, I was not the smartest person in the room. I definitely did not know what I was doing when I got into STEM, but I got my aerospace engineering degree after a few extra tries, and I work as an engineer today. And we our 3D printing lab, like, to say that we're not in STEM or living and breathing STEM every day, that would be a lie. But getting here, it wasn't because I was the smartest person. It was because I found something that I was really passionate about, and I found a solution, or I literally spend most of my day solving problems with engineering somehow. So when I see a story like this, where students are able to get involved in like a mission of space and think about this stuff. Even elementary schoolers have brilliant ideas if you allow them to think about the problem. And it's one of the things that I think is not great for STEM, and it's something that we try to counteract with what we do here on the podcast, which is that, space and science can be for everyone. If it's not, then it isn't. But if you even have a small amount of passion or like you would like to get involved in something in space, and you're not an engineer or a physicist, there's room for you. And that's what I love about this article here in this story. So elementary schoolers prove, this is the article from Live Science, elementary schoolers prove EpiPens become toxic in space, something NASA never knew. And so it's interesting. This article kind of takes a jab at NASA that, they didn't know, and it took elementary school kids to figure it out. But this is the conundrum of space. For a very long time, we did not have all these abilities to send things to space. So there was always a game of figuring out how much money, how many missions, who gets cut, who stays. It was very hard to conduct research in space. So opportunities like this that was run through, so this is students from St. Brother Andre School Program for Gifted Learners in Ottawa were studying the effects of cosmic radiation on epinephrine, the active ingredient found in EpiPens, an emergency treatment given during severe allergic reactions. NASA selected the students' experiment to be part of Cubes in Space, its global STEM program geared specifically to school-age kids. So NASA funded this experiment, and they chose their experiment. There's more opportunities for not only science to happen, but for these kids to have an involvement. I only was able to get involved in something in space when I went for my aerospace engineering degree, and my project was on a CubeSat. I worked on a team where we worked on a CubeSat, the structural side of the CubeSat that was going to take solar weather readings. So that was definitely one of those moments that made me think I want to do this. It was one of those moments where I reached very high, and I was able to have that opportunity to be on that team. And for these kids, I can only imagine what it does for them. But then they also came up with something that's a really good piece of information to have, especially as we start going towards a future where we're going to start sending people into space regularly, and we open up the diversity of humanity to the astronaut pool. And the more and more things that we can know about how people are going to react on planet versus off planet is really, really important. So this epinephrine discovery is incredible. So for the program, the 9 to 12 year-old students design an experiment in which epinephrine samples were placed into tiny cubes and sent to the edge of space via either a high-altitude balloon or a rocket. And once back on Earth, researchers from the John L. Holmes Mass Spectrometry facility at the University of Ottawa tested the samples and found that only 87% contained pure epinephrine, while the other 13% had been transformed into extremely poisonous benzoic acid derivatives, according to a University of Ottawa statement. So, everyone got really crazy about the Chinese balloon that came over the United States. But balloons are an extremely cheap way of getting things to the edge of space. And it's done on the regular for people that are taking weather readings. There are multiple balloons released for rocket launches to check the wind shear as they're going up. It's a very tried and true way of getting to space. So if you don't have a lot of rockets out there and you're just trying to get, make it so that you can fund enough projects for enough kids to do things, setting it up in a balloon is a really, really good way of doing that. So that's what they did here. And so the cosmic radiation has extremely high energy particles, and the atmosphere that we have is really what is our blanket against that kind of radiation. But on the ISS, if we're going into deep space, these are the areas where we need to really pay attention to cosmic radiation, because high energetic particles going through you is not a good thing. And the cosmic radiation shows to have a clear impact on chemicals like epinephrine, it's quoted by Paul Mayer, a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biomolecular Sciences at the University of Iowa. The after samples showed signs that the epinephrine reacted and decomposed, and in fact, no epinephrine was found in the after EpiPen solution samples. This result raises questions about the efficacy of an EpiPen for outer space applications, and these questions are now starting to be addressed by the kids in the PGL program. So this is awesome. I think it's so cool that these kids were able to get involved in something that's a really important answer to have, again, before we send somebody up there, because if you think about what would have been brought for someone that needs an EpiPen, the EpiPen would have been probably in the top 5 things that they need to bring with them. And now that that's not an option, or that perhaps shielding needs to be provided to these EpiPens when they go up there so that they are not exposed to cosmic radiation, we can now take that step and not find out if someone's taking an EpiPen, that's a life or death situation. You can't be giving them something that's toxic. So it's an extremely important study for all of us, and the results are really interesting. And now it makes you think, how many other things do we take for granted that if you throw some cosmic radiation in the mix, it does the exact opposite. So I thought this was an amazing story. It's another reason why open access to space and unhindered access to space for answering questions and posing hypotheses and challenging what was already known is really, really important. And even elementary schoolers can provide really in-depth and important solutions and research, just like the fact that EpiPens become toxic in space when they're exposed to cosmic radiation. A really fun week, fun month. March has been filled with a lot of stuff in space. April is going to be insane. Our first episode of April, we're going to be doing the live stream for the astronauts that are going to be chosen for Artemis 2. We're super excited about that. We're going to hear basically who the first woman is going to be that's going to go to the moon first, this time to orbit on Artemis 2. We're probably going to see, if I had to guess, a person of color on this mission as well, as Artemis 3 is the first woman and first person of color to step foot on the moon. That crew will be more than 2 people, but there is a really interesting candidate pool, and I'm interested to see who these astronauts are going to be. I mean, this is our Apollo program of this era, so this is the first announcement that really starts to make this real. I mean, we're picking the first humans for Artemis. This is a big moment, and it's going to lead the way to Artemis 3, where we're going to land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon and start the return and the beginning of the Artemis generation so that we can build the infrastructure that's needed for us to live in space full-time around the moon and build the gateway to Mars so that we can develop and get ourselves there ASAP. So, thank you for joining us for Today in Space. We thank you very much, as always, for watching us and listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Today in Space Pod, Today in Space Pod on Twitter, and Today in Space on TikTok, and our Facebook page at Today in Space Podcast. Like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. If you guys love what we're doing, share with friends. All of those things help us get promoted. The algorithm likes that kind of stuff, but you got to tell them that you like it. I know there's a lot of you that don't like to like stuff or share stuff. You don't want to mess with your algorithm, but that is the best way to support us. And then, of course, we have our sponsor, Manscaped, where you can get 20% off anything in the store. Use code word SPACE. Of course, we're using the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, and there's a lot more coming out there. So 20% off for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. And then, of course, our 3D printing lab, AG3D Printing, where you can get a free quote on your next project at our website, ag3d-printing.com. You can also see a customer review from our friends over at Snapcaller and see what we did for them to help bring their idea into reality so they could start their business. There's also our Etsy shop, ag3dprinting.etsy.com, where you can purchase one of our gifts on there. We've got a lot of different stuff on there, especially if you're a board gamer or a video gamer. We've got a lot of stuff that can help you out there, and some fun stuff for around the office and your desk. And yeah, that's basically it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next month for another episode of Today in Space. Be well, spread love, and spread science.